Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Galadartus video, where today I'm going to be pitting the 3 legendary birds of Gen 1 up against each other to see which one is the fastest. And usually in these versus videos, I'll pick the Pokemon that I think is most likely to win first, and then go from there. However, with the 3 legendary birds, I think that they're all so strong in different areas that it's really hard to pick and choose which one will actually do the best. So for that reason, I'm going to actually start with the first legendary bird of the trio, that being Articuno, because Uno means one. Anyway, it has 90 HP, 85 attack, 100 defense, 95 special attack, 125 special defense, and 85 speed. And through level up in TM, it only gets access to Ice, Flying, Normal, and a single water type offensive move. And so while it doesn't have a fantastic amount of type coverage, Ice is just such a good offensive type in this game that I don't think it's really going to matter much. However, that also leads us into the problems with the Ice type defensively, because Articuno is an Ice and Flying type, making it weak to quite a few types, and 4 times weak to Rock. And yet, despite having all these weaknesses, it is also built to be the more defensive of the trio, with a higher defense and special defense compared to the others. So let's see how that does. Anyway, with that, our Articuno has a serious nature, which is a neutral nature, but that is perfectly fine. It gets access to the pressure ability, which doubles the PP usage, and at level 10 it has Powder Snow and Gust. And so with that, let's go ahead and get into the run, and for all 3 of these birds, I'm going to be skipping the Old Man. At level 13, Articuno gets the move Mist, and then we go into the battle against the Power Rangers, where today I decided to fight Green. Now, I guess I can use this time to go ahead and talk about some of the strengths of Articuno just going into this. Powder Snow isn't a fantastic move, however, it being a spread move means that I can speed up a lot of the fights in the early game, because a lot of the threats are way weaker than Articuno. And on top of that, Gust isn't a fantastic move, but against these very weak Pokemon, it does suffice. The other thing to note is that of the 3, I'd say Articuno has the weakest starting moves, because it's kind of supposed to be the more defensive of the 3, even though I do think Powder Snow is probably the best of the 3 legendary birds starting elemental move, but that's really just down to the fact that this is a doubles game. But anyway, we beat Green, and I decide to make a detour over to Mount Battle to go pick up the Water Pulse TM, and then, with no real issue throughout the Cypher base, I go into the battle against Loverina. She leaves with the Love Disc and a Beautifly. I go for Gust and a Beautifly right away, taking it down in a single hit, and then out comes Roselia, which goes down the exact same way, and then she sends out her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Delcatty. And it's probably the only Pokemon that's going to take 2 or 3 hits to take down, other than maybe Love Disc. So I go for Water Pulse, and it's not even dealing half. And its Shadow Rushes deal almost nothing. Okay, well, Delcatty isn't a threat at all. It gets confused, so it might just hit itself. It does, takes itself down, and all that's left is that Love Disc, which Gust takes down below Yellow. And I'm able to finish off with another Gust without even really taking much damage at all. Anyway, with that, Articuno has now made it to the obligatory Mirror B section of the video, which means that it's now time to swap our protagonist over to Zapdos, which has 90 HP, 90 attack, 85 defense, 125 special attack, 90 special defense, and 100 speed, making it significantly stronger than Articuno in special attack, as well as having a much higher speed stat. Of course, this comes at the cost of having weaker defenses, but the thing is that Zapdos is an electric flying type, which is significantly better typing than Articuno. However, being an electric type means that it pays another type a toll, and that's because even though it does get flying type moves, in fact the best flying type move in Drill Peck, its only other offensive attacking types are normal and electric. And so any rock ground or steel ground Pokemon are going to be a huge issue for it unless it gets a decent hidden power type. But with that, let's go ahead and move on to our Zapdos in particular, which has a sassy nature, raising its special defense at the cost of its speed, which, considering how fast it is, really shouldn't matter too much. It has pressure as well, and it starts with Peck and Thunder Shock. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, skipping the Old Man just like I did before, I get Thunder Wave at level 13, and then I go into the battle against the Blue Power Ranger because I have super effective damage against all of his Pokemon. Now, something I should have brought up is that at level 49, all these Pokemon get their elemental move of either Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, or Flamethrower. That is, except for Zapdos, who just does not get Thunderbolt at all. It instead gets the move Drill Peck, and unfortunately, Thunderbolt between these 3 is the furthest to get in the game, which will cause a few issues down the line. But anyway, I go over to the move tutor to go pick up the move Mimic. That way I can fight the actual boss of the Cypher base, that being Naps. and that's because Rhyhorn shrugs off every single attack I have, or is completely immune to my electric type attacks, so I go for Mimic to steal the pursuit from Murkrow, and that should hopefully allow me to take down the Rhyhorn in a single hit. I go for it, and while it is fairly close, it is still pretty high up in the red. It hits a Horn attack, taking me down to 11. I do finish it off, bringing out his next Pokemon, a Slackoth. However, I'm already getting extremely low. I get taken down to 7 by another pursuit. Thundershock does take down the Murkrow, bringing out his final Pokemon, but Slackoth is able to use Scratch, and oh, I actually survive. I go for Thundershock, and Beldum doesn't go down, and it doesn't miss, so I get taken down. That's alright. With a couple more levels, I'm able to go back in again, and this time I have more than enough health to take down Naps. So with that, we move on to the actual boss of the area, Lavrina once again, and Thundershock makes quick work of Beautifly. Then out comes Roselia, which goes down to a Peck, and then out comes her final Pokemon, which is that Shadow Delcatty again. And it really shouldn't take more than a couple turns to take down. I go for Thundershock, which is doing just a little over half, so I'm pretty sure it's guaranteed to go down on the next turn. And once it does, all that's left is the Love Disc, which, being a water type, it goes down in a single hit, and with that we beat Lavrina on the first attempt. So with that, we have once again made it to Mirror B, so it's time to move on to our last Pokemon, which is Moltres. It has 90 HP, 100 attack, 90 defense, 125 special attack, 85 special defense, and 90 speed. And I know I said Zapdos is the fast special attacker, and Moltres kind of is that too. However, it is also the strongest physical attacker of all three birds. And I think they're really trying to lean into that because they gave it Wing Attack, the strongest move that any of these three birds get at level 1. And on top of that, it gets Ember, a 40 base power move, which is the strongest starting set between all three of these. So I think that Moltres is going to have a very fast start compared to the other two. However, it runs into a very similar problem that Zapdos has, in that it only gets access to normal fire and flying type moves. However, fire is a lot more flexible than electric is, so that might actually be a bit of an advantage. However, there is one big issue I've neglected to mention, and that it is a fire and flying type, making it weak to a multitude of different types, as well as being 4 times weak to rock as well. So anyway, with that, let's go and move on to our Moltres in particular, which has a lonely nature, raising its attack but lowering its defense, which I think suits Moltres fairly well. Unfortunately, that rock weakness is going to be even more prevalent though. It also gets pressure, and it of course starts with Ember and Wing Attack by level 10. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into it. At level 13, Moltres gets the move Fire Spin, which is just awful, and then I decide to fight the Green Power Ranger because I have super effective damage against all of his Pokemon, and unlike Articuno, I should be able to one-shot just about everything. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and begin the little bit of rambling. If you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now, I guess the last thing I want to mention detail-wise is that Articuno and Moltres both have particle effects flying around them at all times, which is really nice, and Zapdos, whenever it attacks, goes all spiky, which I really like. Now, Moltres actually has an advantage by getting the Charcoal item right off the bat, which raises fire-type damage by 10%, and so I can use that extra damage to help take down the Rhyhorn here, because it can at least hit it. Unfortunately, it's not quite a 2-shot, so it is going to take at least 3 unless it got burnt there, but it didn't. It's another Horn Attack, and now I'm down to half health. I go for Ember to finish it off, and then he sends out Slackoth, and I'm already getting very low. Wing Attack doesn't quite take down Murkrow in a single hit, and a Scratch from Slackoth takes me all the way down to 9. Another Wing Attack does take it down though, and then out comes his Beldum, which is a Steel type, so hopefully Ember takes it down in a single hit. It does, and then all that's left is Slackoth, which is loafing this turn, so I can attack it and finish it off on the following. So a very narrow victory against Naps, but then we go into the battle against Lavrina. She leads with her Love Disc and Beautifly once again, and I go for Wing Attack into Love Disc right away, because I'm not actually afraid of Beautifly all that much. And Love Disc does have super effective damage, so I take it down after a couple turns, and then she sends out her Roselia, which goes down to a Wing Attack as well. And then she sends out her final Pokemon, which is that Shadow Delcatty. And it should probably be taken down below half by Wing Attack, so I go ahead and go for it. And it's actually right at, or maybe even a little above half. So I decide to go for Ember because I do have a higher special attack stat, and it actually does take it down. So all that's left is the Beautifly, which also goes down to an Ember, and with that we beat Lavrina, which brings us to the chart. And currently, in the lead, we have Moltres at 1 hour and 37 minutes, Zapdos in second with 1 hour and 54 minutes, and Articuno in last at 2 hours and 1 minute. So right now all the legendary birds are fairly similar in time, though Moltres does have a distinct advantage, so let's see if we can hold on to that in the next portion of the game. So with that, let's go ahead and move back onto Articuno, who is currently going to the Real Game Tower to go pick up its two favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect, and I'm going to teach Hidden Power right away, and Articuno gets Hidden Power Grass at 64 base power. And I guess Grass is alright, it does give it another type, though Ice does hit most of the types that Grass would anyway. But moving on, I pick up the Swinub for the Never Melt Ice item, which is going to raise Ice type damage by 10%, and then I can pick up the TM for Ice Beam, which is the best Ice type move before going into the battle against Snaddle. He leads with a Lantern and a Quagsire, and because I have Hidden Power Grass, I can take down the Quagsire right away, though I do think Ice Beam probably would have been a 1 or 2 shot anyway. Go for Ice Beam, which takes down Lunatone in a single hit, and then out comes Cast Form. And the Cast Form really shouldn't be too much of an issue. I mean, it has Shockwave, which is super effective, but it doesn't really do too much. Lantern is definitely the bigger threat here, so I go for another Hidden Power to finish it off, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Metang. Now, unfortunately, I am getting quite low here. Another Shockwave shouldn't finish me off, and Water Pulse isn't quite doing half to Metang. It does luckily confuse, but it hits through with the Metal Claw. Now, despite how close Articuno was to beating Snaddle, unfortunately it just couldn't get the job done at that level, so I decided to do a little bit of extra training, and then come back to the fight at level 41, and on attempt number 5. So right away I take down the Quagsire just as before, except this time I'm actually going to let the Lunatone set up Shadow Sky. This will allow it to chip down the Lantern after I do a little bit of damage to it. That way I can just ignore it for the rest of the fight, and it should hopefully go down right about the same time that the Metang comes out. So I take down the Lunatone in a single hit, and then out comes the Cast Form once again, which of course goes down to a single Ice Beam as well, and then he sends out the Metang once again. And the Metang before was a bit of an issue because it wasn't quite a 2-shot. Now the thing I realized though is that even though Ice Beam isn't very effective, I'm pretty sure it does more damage just because it's a much higher base power. So I go for Ice Beam, and it's doing well over half, and a second Ice Beam takes it down. So with that, we defeat Snaddle, and now at the Snag and base right before the next boss fight, I decide to teach Protect over Gust, and then I go into the battle against Gonzap. He leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf, and right away the Nuzleaf is going to go for Fake Out, so I Protect on the first turn to ignore that, and then I go for Ice Beam into the Electrode. Luckily I do outspeed, and it goes down in a single hit. Then out comes Vileplume. Nuzleaf hits a Hyper Beam, dealing no damage. Ice Beam is able to take down the Vileplume in a single hit, and then out comes Whiscash. The Hidden Power is very nice here for that 4 times effective damage, but I'm honestly not sure it actually mattered here either. I probably could have just gone for Ice Beam and gotten the same effect. But anyway, Ice Beam takes down the Skarmory with a crit, not sure if that was necessary though, and that just leaves the Nuzleaf, which goes down to a single Ice Beam. So with nothing in between, we move on to the battle against Gorgon. He leads with a Lairon and a Celio, and right away I go for Hidden Power into Celio, which actually is a moment where a Hidden Power Grass is useful, taking it down in a single hit. Unfortunately, I get my defense lowered right away by Iron Tail, so I decide to go for Water Pulse to take down the Lairon in a single hit, and then he sends out his Ursaring. And it's always dangerous to leave Slowking in because usually it goes for Water Pulse, except it's using Headbutt, which is something I don't think I've ever seen it do before, so that's good to know. But since it is going for that, and it's just going to continue doing that it seems, I'm just going to take down the rest of his team. So I take down his first Shadow Pokemon, the Shadow Primeape, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Hypno. And an Ice Beam does great damage to it, not quite enough to take it down though. Its Shadow Storms deal almost nothing. So I go ahead and take down the Hypno, and then all that's left is the Slowking, which I do have Hidden Power Grass for. It might honestly not be a one-shot though. It's not, but it does almost take it down. One more Hidden Power, and with that, we beat Gorgon. So now Articuno is moving on to the last area of the game, and so it's time to pick up where we left off with our second contestant, Zapdos, where I'm going to be picking up the Voltorb from Mirror B for the Magnet item, raising all electric type damage by 10%, and then I'm running over to the Real Game Tower to go pick up my 2 favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect, and I'm also going to pick up Thunder at the same time. But now it's time to see what Hidden Power type Zapdos got, and it got Hidden Power Flying, which isn't great, but it's 62 base power, so it is stronger than Peck. But because I didn't know that quite yet, I decided to teach it over Thunder Wave. I can always teach Thunder Wave again later if I really need it though. But anyway, before the battle against Snaddle, I decided to teach Thunder, and then right away I go for Thunder Shock into the Lantern to see how much damage it's doing, and it's not quite half. Luckily, Quagsire does miss, though I don't really have anything to deal with Quagsire very well either. But Zapdos is also the only legendary bird that isn't 4 times weak to its Rock Tombs, so hopefully that doesn't do too much. it's doing about 17. That's actually not terrible at all. I decide to take down Quagsire, bringing out the Lunatone, but unfortunately I don't get much further because Flail finishes me off. That's alright, because the plan is very simple. I decide to go for Thunder to see how much damage that does to Lantern. Of course I'm going to Call first to raise the accuracy, and then going for Thunder, it does actually take down Lantern in a single hit. That is good to know. Then out comes Lunatone. Unfortunately, getting hit by Rock Tomb might actually make me fast at the Lunatone, which unfortunately it does, but Thunder takes down Lunatone in a single hit. Then out comes Cast Form, and since my accuracy is already high, I may as well go ahead and take down the Cast Form the same way. And I'm actually slower than the Cast Form. Okay, well Cast Form goes down in a single hit, then out comes Metang. And another Rock Tomb. As long as I don't get crit and I don't miss, I think I should be fine. Metang goes for Confusion, luckily no confusion, and then I take down the Metang with Thunder, and I get crit and taken down by Shadow Sky. That's alright, go back into the battle, now a few levels later, because this has taken more attempts than I thought it would. So I call to raise the accuracy of Thunder just like before, and unfortunately I missed the first one, and I missed the second one, and then I missed the third one. This is about a 93% accurate move right now, and I just missed it 3 times in a row. And unfortunately, that kinda is the biggest hurdle of this fight, is the fact that despite being about 93% accurate, Thunder would not stop missing. And on top of that, Quagsire just kept hitting. So unfortunately, here we are now at attempt number 9, which, judging by the first attempt, didn't seem like it was going to take this long, but I go for Thunder right away, taking down Lantern, and then out comes the Lunatone. And then I go for Thunder to take down the Lunatone, and then I go for Thunder to take down the Cast Form, and then I go for Thunder to take down Metang. It really should have been quite simple, I just didn't get the luck I needed. And it's really annoying because we're in the middle of a race where time is of the essence, and unfortunately Thunder just was not working with me for so long that Zapdos lost quite a bit of time here that it really didn't need to. So hopefully it'll be able to get through the next sections a little bit quicker, and hopefully make up for the lost time. One thing to note though is that Zapdos and Articuno finish this fight at the same level, which I think is going to continue for all 3 legendary birds, maybe? So I'll keep that in mind when I come around to Moltres. Anyway, with that, I defeat Snaddle, and then I go into the battle against Gonzap. And because I'm an electric type, I don't think that Electrode is going to use Spark, so I just go ahead and call on the first turn, and luckily it doesn't, it's just going for Sonic Boom. So I go for Thunder, which takes down the Electrode despite being resistant, and then he sends out Vileplume, which I have hidden power to take down hopefully in a single hit, which it does, and then he sends out Whiscash. Unfortunately I don't really have a great move for it, so I do just have to go for hidden power, which does do over half. And it just goes for Rock Tomb, which misses. I take it down with another hidden power, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is Skarmory, and Skarmory of course goes down to a single Thunder. Probably should have gone for Thunder Shock there, just in case it missed, but it didn't, so I go for hidden power to take down Nuzleaf, and we beat Gonzap on the first attempt. Now at level 49, I get the move Drill Peck, which I teach over hidden power, and then I pick up the TM for Thunderbolt, which I decide to teach over Thunder Shock, before going into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with a Lairon and a Celio, and right away I go for Thunderbolt and Celio to take it down in a single turn, and then out comes Slowking. Lairon just decides to go for Takedown, which I guess makes sense because Iron Tail isn't very effective. Go for Thunderbolt to take down the Slowking, and then out comes Ursaring, which should also go down to a single Thunderbolt. And then out comes his first Shadow Pokemon, which is that Shadow Primeape once again, and it will definitely go down to a single Thunderbolt, which will then just be his final Pokemon, a Shadow Hypno, and that might be the only thing that can survive a Thunderbolt. So I'm going to go ahead and use Drill Peck. However, in hindsight, Thunderbolt probably would have taken it down anyway, but it's not like the Shadow Storms from it are really doing that much damage, so yeah, another Drill Peck finishes it off, and then all that's left is Lairon, which of course goes down to a Thunderbolt. So with that, we beat Gorgon on the very first attempt, and now Zapdos is going to Ciderdark Isle, but we now need to rewind back to Moltres, who is at level 25 learning the move Agility. Nice job. At the Real Game Tower, I go pick up my 2 favorite T-Hymns once again, Hidden Power and Protect, and at the same time I'm going to pick up Fire Blast just in case I need that extra damage. So with that, what Hidden Power type did Moltres get? Well, it got Hidden Power Fire at 68 base power. So it's definitely a huge upgrade over Ember, but it's not really the type coverage it needed. And unfortunately, only having fire and normal type moves is going to cause a huge issue because of the next battle, Snaddle. He has just the Pokemon to completely block Moltres, and that is Lantern, being resistant to all of its moves. And on top of that, it does super effective damage with its shockwaves, and I can't even really attack it first because Quagsire is around and does 4 times effective damage with Rock Tomb, which just isn't great, and then Lunar Tone also resists all my moves as well. So Moltres has to do a little bit of grinding, which I kind of expected I already had to do because it is such a lower level compared to the other ones, and at the same time I can get the move Facade, which I decide to teach over Ember, and I quickly get poisoned before returning to the battle against Snaddle. Now there are some major downsides to using the move Facade, the first of which of course is that I'm constantly taking damage, which really isn't all that much of an issue as long as I'm getting one-hit KOs, which against Lunar Tone unfortunately I'm not, but that's alright, this is the first attempt with Facade. The other issue is that in order to continue using Facade and not waste a whole bunch of time getting repoisoned every time, I need to reset, which means that I'm not getting extra levels from each fight, and so I'm not really growing each time I lose, which is quite the downside. And to make matters worse, eventually I just decide I can't do it at level 42, so I go ahead and get up to level 44, repoison myself again, because it just really wasn't feasible at level 42. So I go back into the battle again, and as you might have seen in this attempt, I take down Lantern right away, and that's because all I need for a victory in this fight is for Quagsire to not hit a Rock Tomb, which is a 20% chance to miss. It took 8 attempts for him to miss a single time. Now, luckily it's not that bad because Quagsire is the first Pokemon, so as soon as I see it hit, I can just reset, not wasting too much time. But this is attempt number 16 overall, so Moltres did lose quite a bit of time here. Anyway, moving on, at the SS Libra, I finally get the move Flamethrower, which I teach over Hidden Power, and then I get the move Protect, which I teach over Fire Blast. Before going into the battle against Gonzap, he leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf, just as before, and just like Articuno, I'm going to Protect on the first turn to avoid that Fake Out, take down the Electrode with Flamethrower, and then out comes Vileplume, which will also go down to a single Flamethrower. And once it does, he'll send out his next Pokemon, the Whiscash once again, and honestly, I think Flamethrower still might be the best move against it. It does well over half, and it's not like it's really threatening me with anything. I mean, Rock Tomb doesn't really do that much damage. Go for another Flamethrower to take it down, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, the Skarmory once again, which is weak to Flamethrower, so it goes down in a single hit, and all that's left is the Nuzleaf, which falls the exact same way. So a very easy Gonzap fight. And with really nothing in between, we move right away to Gorgon. He leads with a Lairon and a Celio, and right away I go for Flamethrower into the Celio, which isn't the correct choice because it does have thick fat, effectively making it not very effective against it. It hits a crit Water Pulse, though luckily it didn't confuse me. But it does show that it will do a lot of damage when it hits. I go for Wing Attack to finish it off, and then he sends out Slowking, which I don't really have a fantastic move to use against it. Wing Attack should deal a good amount of damage, but it's not going to be a one-shot. It takes it down very low though, more than I expected. It goes for Water Pulse, luckily no confusion either, so I'm able to protect and then finish it off. And luckily that should be the real last threat on his team because everything else should go down to a single Flamethrower. He sends out Ursaring, and well, I go for Protect just to be safe because I am getting kind of low. Go for Flamethrower, which takes down the Ursaring, and then he sends out the Shadow Primeape, which I can either decide to go for Flamethrower or I can go for Wing Attack. Either or, I decide to go for Flamethrower, taking it down in a single hit, and then out comes Hypno. Now, unfortunately, Lairon does get a crit on takedown, so I do decide to play it safe. I don't think I really needed to play it this safe, but it still might have been worth doing anyway. Go for Flamethrower, actually not quite enough to take down Hypno, so it's able to hit a Shadow Storm. And you know what, I guess had that gotten a crit, I could have gotten taken out, so maybe I should have been worried. Anyway, all that's left is Lairon, which goes down to a single Flamethrower, and we beat Gorgon on the first attempt. So now all 3 legendary birds have made it to Cidardark Isle, so let's go back over to the chart, and we can see that the placements have shifted quite a bit, with Articuno now taking the lead at 550, Zapdos in second, but only 11 minutes behind, and Moltres completely losing its lead and ending up about 30 minutes behind Articuno. Now at this point, it still could be anyone's game, because Zapdos definitely has the strength to get through a lot of these fights a bit faster, but maybe Articuno's better defensive stats and just slow and steady approach might be good enough to get through this last area of the game without suffering too many casualties. Or maybe even Moltres might make a surprise comeback and destroy the competition. But anyway, with that, let's go ahead and move back over to Articuno into the battle against Lavrina. She leads with a Gardevoir and a Gorbis, and right away I go for Ice Beam, taking down the Gardevoir in a single hit, and then she sends out Roselia. Now luckily all the legendary birds are genderless, so I don't have to worry about attract shenanigans, so I can take down all of her team without having to worry about infatuation. So I take down the Gorbis with Hidden Power Grass, which definitely did help there. I'm able to take down the Farfetch'd, and then she sends out her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Altaria, which at this point really can't do anything to me. I decide to take it down, and all that's left is Roselia, which only really wastes a couple seconds with its Leech Seed healing before I take it down with Ice Beam. So with that, we move on to the top of the volcano, where we run into Snaddle. He leads with a Quagsire and a Matang, and right away I go for Hidden Power to take down Quagsire in a single hit, and then out comes Scizor. And Articuno doesn't really have anything for it. Water Pulse does deal half to it, and it luckily gets confused, though it doesn't hit itself in confusion. Hits a Steel Wing, taking me down pretty low. I go for Protect just to heal up a bit, and then I finish it off with another Water Pulse. He then sends out his next Pokemon, which is a Shadow Soul Rock, which should probably go down to a single Ice Beam, I would think. And it does. Okay, no Shadow Sky, out comes Cast Form, which absolutely goes down to a single Ice Beam, though just to be safe at this point I do want to Protect, and then take it down with Ice Beam, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Starmie. And it might not go down to a single Hidden Power, but it will definitely do quite a lot of damage, though once again, just to be safe, I'm going to go for Protect to heal up a bit, and as I suspected, it doesn't go down, though it was surprisingly close. I wasted a turn with Protect, because honestly, I outspeed both these Pokemon and neither of them are all that threatening. Go for Hidden Power to finish off the Starmie. Matang's hitting very weak Metal Claws, and unless it got an attack boost, it's really not dangerous. Go for Water Pulse, and it gets a crit, taking it down in a single hit. Okay, with that, we now move on to Ardos. He leads with a Shadow Swallow and Alakazam, and right away I go for Ice Beam, taking down the Alakazam in a single hit. And I'm actually faster than Shadow Swallow, which is really nice. It sets up Shadow Sky, then out comes the Kingdra. I go for Protect to stall out those Shadow Sky turns, because I really don't want the Pokemon later down the line to have it. Go for Ice Beam into the Swallow to take it down, and then he sends out Heracross. Kingdra goes for Hydro Pump, and it's doing very little damage, though with all three legendary birds, if it does do quite a bit of damage, it's not really that much of an issue, because you can just PP stall it because they all have the pressure ability. So I could just Protect on every other turn and only get hit by one of the Hydro Pumps. Anyway, I take down the Heracross, and then he sends out his Shadow Electabuzz. Now the Kingdra is stuck using Double Edge. I go for Ice Beam into the Electabuzz, taking it down. Okay, it actually survived on a little bit of HP. And it used Shadow Half, having the HP of everything on the field. I guess I probably should have taken down Kingdra then, so that it could have affected his last Pokemon, the Shadow Snorlax, because I don't really have anything amazing to take it down. I go for Protect. All I need is a bit of luck here. I go for Ice Beam, and I get a critical hit and freeze it. Okay, that was extremely lucky. Nice work, Articuno. I take it down with another Ice Beam, and then all that's left is that Kingdra, which is already extremely low because of all the double edge hits, so I finished off with an Ice Beam, and we move on to the battle against Gorgon once again. He leads with a Ursaring and a Slowking, and right away I go for Ice Beam and Ursaring, taking it down in a single hit, and then he sends out Aggron. And the Slowking here is actually going for Psychic, which isn't too bad. I think that's preferable over Water Pulse, though it does have the chance to lower my special defense by a stage, which could cause issue later on. Anyway, I take down the Aggron in a single hit with Water Pulse, and Walrein is able to survive a Hidden Power Grass, though it doesn't really do much damage in return, so I'm able to finish it off on the following turn, bringing out his first Shadow Pokemon, which is a Shadow Poliwrath. Now, it is going to set up Shadow Sky on the first turn, so I do want to take it down as soon as possible. And that special defense drop isn't great. It's able to survive the Hidden Power Grass and set up Shadow Sky, and I get confused. Okay, well, this is going very downhill very quick. I hit myself in confusion, it hits a Shadow Storm, dealing a ton of damage, and Water Pulse takes me into 4 HP before I get finished off by Shadow Sky. Okay, well, I guess I did get extremely lucky on the previous fight, so I guess it's only fair that I have terrible luck on this one. That's alright though. I go into the battle once again, I take down the Ursaring just as before, and then I finish off the Aggron too, and then he sends out the Walrein once again. Except this time, I am going to actually take down the Slowking. Wall Rain really doesn't do much damage to me, and because I'm an Ice type, I can't actually get frozen, so Ice Beam really isn't as dangerous as Psychic and its potential special defense drop. So I take down the Slowking, and then out comes the Poliwrath once again. Unfortunately, there's no real way for me to take it down in a single hit without a crit, so it is going to be able to set up Shadow Sky, but without the special defense drop, it's actually not really all that dangerous. And I think I may be able to take out the next Shadow Pokemon in a single hit anyway. Though I am going to play it safe and just go for Protect to stall out the Fruity Pebbles just in case it does come down to the wire. So I take down the Poliwrath and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Mr. Mime. Now it does have a fairly good special defense stat, so there is a strong chance that Ice Beam doesn't take it down in a single hit. So I am just kind of hoping that it doesn't do enough damage and I can take it down whenever the Shadow Storm ends. Ice Beam, of course, doesn't take it down, though it was a lot closer than I expected, and it froze it, which Hidden Power takes it down, and all that's left is the Wall Rain. Okay, well, definitely another very lucky fight for Articuno, though I'm not sure how much Mr. Mime would have actually done. Anyway, moving on to the battle against Eldest, he leads with a Shadow Manectric and Ninjask, and right away I go for Ice Beam into the Manectric, that way I can set up Shadow Sky or use Shadow End. And then he sends out his next Pokemon, which is a Shadow Salamence, and it will definitely go down in a single hit. Now, in hindsight, I'm probably playing this fight a little too safe, because Articuno is definitely going to wipe his entire team with little to no issue. All but 2 of his Pokemon are weak to Ice, and Shadow Manectric went down in a single hit, so it's not like anything's really all that much of a threat. And even if it was, his final Pokemon is a Shadow Lapras, which is 4 times resistant to Ice, but I have Hidden Power Grass. So once again, a very nice use of the Hidden Power type that Articuno got, and so I'll be able to 2-shot it, and that will just leave the Ninjask, which of course goes down to a single Ice Beam. And luckily everything has made it perfect to where it's not going to protect this turn, so I can take it down right away. So with that, we beat Eldest on the first attempt very easily. So now with that, we move on to the big box legendary, Shadow Lugia. And right away I go for Ice Beam, but Lugia actually outspeeds and gets a crit with Shadow Blast, not dealing very much damage at all though. I mean, it was still quite a bit, but way less than I would have expected. And then it gets a crit with Shadow Storm. Okay, Lugia, get out of here. Anyway, now moving on to the battle against Greevil. He leads with a Shadow Rhydon and Moltres. I go for Ice Beam into Moltres, which of course doesn't take it down in a single hit. I get burnt and Shadow Wind takes me down. Okay, that's perfectly fine. Second attempt. Go back into the battle once again. This time I go for Water Pulse into Moltres, doing way less damage, but I just wanted to check. And luckily Rhydon misses Shadow End. I decide to Protect to heal up nearly to full again, and then I go for another Water Pulse to take down the Rhydon. And then he sends out Executor. Now, Executor is probably just going to go for Shadow In, just like the Rhydon was, however, it doesn't hit nearly as hard. So I decide to go ahead and take down Moltres this turn, because it is always going to be hitting with its Shadow Fires. So I take it down, and then he sends out his Tauros. Now, Intimidate doesn't really matter for any of the legendary birds that much, but its setting of Shadow Sky could be an issue, so I decide to take it down right away, which then brings out an Articuno. Hello there, other Articuno. Anyway, there's probably no way for me to take down Articuno in a single hit without a crit, so I decide to take down the Executor instead, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Zapdos. Now, I should be able to outspeed Zapdos and probably take it down in a single hit, and the opposing Articuno has Shadow Chill, which does have a chance to freeze, but because I'm an Ice type, I don't think it can. So Articuno is definitely not a threat whatsoever, unless it were to have set up Shadow Sky a lot earlier. Then it could have done a lot more damage, but it waited till now. So goodbye Articuno, and we beat Greevil on the second attempt. Now moving back over to Zapdos, and we're in the battle against Lavrina, and I take down the Gorbis right away with a Thunderbolt, then she sends out her Roselia. Gardevoir goes for Ice Punch, dealing a little bit of damage, but it's not too bad. Drillpeck takes down Gardevoir in a single hit, and then out comes her first Shadow Pokemon, the Shadow Farfetch'd, and Roselia is able to set up Leech Seed. And then I go for Thunderbolt to take down the Farfetch'd right away because I don't want to get hit by Shadow Panic, and then she sends out her final Pokemon, that Shadow Altaria. Now, unfortunately, I don't have super effective damage against Altaria, but I assume Thunderbolt will take it down in a single hit. I go for Drillpeck to get rid of Roselia and the Leech Seed damage, and Altaria's Shadow Breaks really don't do that much damage. Go for Thunderbolt, and it does take it down in a single hit. So with that, we move on to the top of the volcano, where I decide to teach the move Protect over Mimic, and then I go into the battle against Snattle. He leads with his Quagsire and Metang, and right away I go for Drillpeck into the Quagsire, which doesn't quite one-shot. and it goes for Body Slam. Luckily it didn't paralyze though. I decided to go for Protect just to heal up nearly to full, and then go for another Drill Peck to take down the Quagsire before he sends out his next Pokemon, Scizor. Now Metang is probably the bigger threat between these two because it does have that 10% chance to freeze with Ice Punch, whereas Scizor only really has Slash to deal neutral damage, and it's not really doing all that much damage at all. He sends out a Soul Rock, but it goes down right away, and then out comes Castform, which absolutely goes down to a Thunderbolt as well. And then he sends out his final Pokemon, the Shadow Starmie, which is absolutely slower than Zapdos, and also goes down to a single Thunderbolt. So with that, all that's left is that Scizor, which has done almost nothing to me, and a Thunderbolt takes it down in a single hit. So with that, we move on to Ardos and his Shadow Swell on Alakazam, and since Articuno was able to outspeed Swallow, Zapdos definitely can, and it goes down in a single hit, and then out comes his Kingdra. Alakazam does have Ice Punch, which, same as the Metang before, is a bit threatening. And in fact, I probably should have done the same thing I did with Articuno and just stall out the Hydro Pumps on Kingdra, but I decided not to do that in this fight, and so I am risking that 10% every single turn that I leave the Alakazam alive, which is basically the entire time. And I get taken down a half, go for Protect. Luckily the Electabuzz decides to go for Shadow Half, so it's not going to be attacking the next turn, which means I can finally take down that Alakazam. And then he sends out his final Pokemon, the Shadow Snorlax once again, and this is where things might come down to luck. I decide to go for Protect just to heal up as much as I can, and then I go for Thunderbolt to take down the Electabuzz because I really don't want to be hit by Shadow Mist. Shadow End hits, and Zapdos is taken down into yellow, but Snorlax is taken down to half. I heal up a little bit, it also heals up a bit. I go for Drill Peck, and had I not protected there, I probably could have taken it down that turn, but it doesn't end up mattering because I'm able to take it down and beat Ardos on the first attempt. So now moving on to Gorgon, and I forgot to hit record right away, but I just took down the Slowking in a single Thunderbolt, and then I take down the Aggron in a single Thunderbolt, and then out comes the Walrein, and I go for Thunderbolt into it, taking it down in a single hit, and then out comes the Shadow Poliwrath. And unlike Articuno, I know for a fact I can take it down in a single hit, so I don't have to risk it setting up Shadow Sky, making it and Mr. Mime stronger. Speaking of, he sends out his Shadow Mr. Mime, and it should probably go down to either a Drill Peck or a Thunderbolt. I go for Thunderbolt to take down Ursaring first though, and then Mr. Mime hits the Shadow Storm, dealing quite a bit more damage than I expected. Go for Drill Peck, and it takes it down in a single hit. So with that, we now move on to Eldis. He leads with the Shadow Manectric and Ninjask, and unfortunately I don't really have a great move for taking down Manectric other than Calling and using Thunder, though I guess in hindsight I didn't use Thunderbolt at all to check this. However, there is still a pretty good reason to go for the Call and Thunder strategy early. That way it can be useful later on in the fight. But anyway, I go for Thunder, and before that happens, Ninjask gets an Omni Boost. Kind of annoying. Manectric does go down in a single hit though, then out comes Salamence, which is another Pokemon that might have been able to survive a Thunderbolt, but Thunder absolutely takes it down. Now, I went for Protect here, and that's because I forgot about the Pressure ability, reducing the amount of Silver Wind turns that Ninjask has, but it doesn't really end up mattering. I take down the Salamence and the Thunder, and then out comes Flygon, which is unfortunately a ground type, so I will need to use Drill Peck to take it down. And it's doing over half, so it will only take a couple turns. Of course, I am going to protect this turn because the Ninjask is going to be attacking every other turn now. And then I go for Drill Peck to finish off the Flygon, and then he sends out Marowak. Now this is the biggest threat on his entire team because I have to use Drill Peck, and if it hits, there's a very good chance I lose on the spot. And it does half, and it misses. Thank goodness. So I'm able to take it down with another Drill Peck, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Lapras. Now, if I was worried about this not being a one-shot, I could have gone for Thunder, though because it's a water type, I was fairly certain Thunderbolt would do the job, and then all that's left is the Ninjask, which of course goes down to another Thunderbolt. So with that, we move on to the big box legendary, Shadowlokia, and I go for Thunderbolt right away. Shadow Blast doesn't really do too much, and Thunderbolt takes it down in a single hit. And so with that, we now move on to the final boss, Gravel, and he leads with his Rhydon and Moltres, and right away I go for Thunderbolt into Moltres, taking it down in a single hit, and then out comes Executor, which I do have super effective damage against with Drill Peck. Unfortunately, Rhydon does end up hitting, and I really don't have anything to deal with Rhydon, so I will just need to allow it to hit a couple times before I can take it down. Drill Peck does take down Executor in a single hit, which is really nice to know. However, with the Intimidate, it's probably not the case. I go for Thunderbolt to take down the Tauros before it's able to set up Shadow Sky, and then he sends out Articuno. and unfortunately Rhydon hits another Shadow Wind, taking me down. So I go back into the battle for a second attempt, and unfortunately Zapdos has to pay the electric toll, just like all electric types do, because Rhydon has a 50-50 chance of having Lightning Rod. And to make matters worse, 5 out of the 8 total attempts that this fight took, he had Lightning Rod, which is just kind of annoying, but it happens. So I go back into the battle for the final attempt now, and I'm able to take down Zapdos right away. Then I can take down the Executor right away. Now that I've used up all my rare candies, I'm not taking nearly as much damage from the Rhydon, though I do wish it would miss sometimes. Anyway, I take down the Tauros with a Thunderbolt, and then out comes Articuno. And unlike our Articuno, Zapdos should be able to take this down with a single Thunderbolt. However, Rhydon has now put itself in range for Drill Peck to KO it, so because it's such a nuisance, I'm going to take it down now. I don't think Articuno is going to be doing as much damage as it was doing, which its Shadow Chills are only doing about 40 damage. With that being said, though, Zapdos is getting quite low. I go for Thunderbolt to take down the Articuno, and all that's left is his Zapdos, which, hello other Zapdos, and goodbye other Zapdos. And with that, Zapdos has beaten Greevil. So with that, we now move on to Moltres to see how it's going to do through the last area of the game. Right away, I go for Flamethrower into Gorbis because it's much more of a defensive Pokemon, and so it's able to take it down in a single hit. And then I use Wing Attack to take down Gardevoir, and then she sends out her first Shadow Pokemon, that Shadow Farfetch'd once again. And just like the other two, getting rid of Farfetch'd first is always the most important, so it goes down in a single hit. Now, unlike the other two, I don't actually have any decent move for Altaria. I mean, Wing Attack's okay, but it's not especially strong, and it won't take it down unless I get a crit. I take down Azalea with a Flamethrower, and a crit from Altaria does quite a bit, and Wing Attack is doing a little over half. I get taken down kinda low, but I'm able to take it down and beat Laverna on the first attempt with no real issue. At the top of the volcano, I run into Snaddle once again, and I go for Wing Attack into Quagsire, doing about the same amount of damage that Zapdos was doing with Drill Peck. And Quagsire is going for Waterfall, which does deal a decent amount of damage, so I decide to finish it off. And then he sends out Scizor, which is 4 times weak to fire, so I know for a fact it'll go down. However, Matang is going for Thunder Punch, which is definitely a bit more threatening, so I decide to take it down first, and then he sends out his Shadow Soul Rock. And once again, Moltres really has no way of dealing with this quickly, and unfortunately Scizor got a crit. Go for Flamethrower, which doesn't quite take down Soul Rock, so it's able to set up Shadow Sky. And that unfortunately means that Moltres is going to have to bleed quite a lot of time, because I really don't want the Shadow Starmie reaping the benefits of the Fruity Pebbles. Otherwise it's going to be doing a lot more damage, so I do need to stall them out before the Starmie comes out. So I go for Flamethrower to take down the Shadow Soul Rock, and then he sends out Castform, which I am able to take down with a single Flamethrower, but of course I need to protect every other turn, that way I can waste the most amount of turns. Go for Flamethrower, takes it down in a single hit, and then out comes the Shadow Starmie. And just like that, the Shadow Sky has ended, and now we hope that Starmie doesn't deal way too much damage for Moltres to handle. I go for Wing Attack, and it's a 2-shot on Starmie. It goes for Shadow Storm, taking me down to 41, and I think had Scizor gotten a crit there, I probably would have gone down. Well, that's good to know. Go for another Wing Attack to take down the Starmie. And then Scizor runs out of Slash PP and goes for Aerial Ace, not doing enough to take me down, and I finish it off with a Flamethrower. Definitely a bit closer than I would have liked, but now moving on to the battle against Ardos, and right away I decide to take down Alakazam because it does have super effective damage with Thunder Punch, and Swellow doesn't really do anything right off the bat. I mean, Shadow Sky is kinda slow, but I can go for Protect, and luckily it does decide to go for Shadow Half, which will allow me to take down the Kingdra in a single hit, hopefully, because it is 4 times resistant to my Flamethrowers, and Wing Attack probably wouldn't have been able to take it down in a single hit. Then out comes Heracross, which absolutely goes down in a single hit. However, I don't want to risk being hit by Shadow Half, so I Protect once again, and Swellow goes for it again. And so now I'm able to safely take down the Heracross with a Wing Attack, and then he sends out his next Shadow Pokemon, Shadow Electabuzz. Now, Electabuzz might actually elect to go for Shadow Half as well. However, I'm just going to get rid of it right away because I'd rather that Shadow Half go into Snorlax. Unfortunately, Swellow decides to go for Shadow Sky, which is probably the worst outcome because now when Snorlax hits the Shadow Wind, it does half my health. So, and unfortunately I can't heal either, so I am just going to have to hope that Wing Attack takes it down because Snorlax is much less physically defensive, but unfortunately it misses the KO, though Snorlax misses its Shadow Wind, and so I'm able to scrape by very narrowly. So now we move on to the battle against Gorgon, and I go for Wing Attack into Slowking right away, not enough to take it down, and it hits a Water Pulse. Luckily no confusion, go for Protect to heal up a bit, and then I go for another Wing Attack to finish off the Slowking, bringing out his next Pokemon, Aggron, which should go down to a single Flamethrower, I think. However, just to be safe, I am going to Protect, and then I go for Flamethrower to take it down, which it does, and then he sends out Walrein. Now, you would think I would have learned my lesson by now and not go for Flamethrower and instead go for Wing Attack, but I completely disregard its ability every single time, and I'm not punished for it because I get a crit. Then he sends out Poliwrath, which might actually survive a Wing Attack. No, it doesn't, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Mr. Mime, and it will absolutely go down to a Wing Attack. However, just to be safe, I decide to Protect anyway, just in case Ursaring gets a crit. Go for Wing Attack, taking Mr. Mime down, and Slash luckily does not get a crit, and I go for Flamethrower to take down the Ursaring. So with that, we beat Gorgon on the first attempt. Now moving on to Eldest, and he leads with the Shadow Manectric and Ninjask, and right away I go for Flamethrower into the Manectric to take it down, and then he sends out Salamence. Now unfortunately, I really don't have any good move for Salamence. I guess the best outcome would be going for Flamethrower and getting a burn, which I go for Flamethrower, and it's almost dealing half, which is a bit surprising, though unfortunately no burn. And then I decide to go ahead and use the move Wing Attack, completely disregarding the Intimidate that hit me, and so it does way less. So I will need to take one more turn to take it down, though there's a good chance that would have been the case anyway if Flamethrower didn't get just a low roll on that first one. But anyway, the Salamence goes down, and then he sends out Flygon, and right away I go for Wing Attack again, completely forgetting about the Intimidate, though it is still doing half, which is quite good, so I can go for another Wing Attack to finish it off. And then once that Flygon goes down, he then sends out Marowak once again, and Marowak is definitely a big threat because it does huge damage, but also I think Flamethrower should be able to just take it down right away, which it does. And then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Lapras, and despite being part Ice, I don't think Flamethrower is going to take it down right away. It doesn't. It's able to set up Shadow Sky, though definitely way too late at this point. So I can go for another Flamethrower to finish it off, and then all that's left is the Ninjask, which absolutely goes down to a single Flamethrower and can't deal enough damage to take down Moltres. So with that, we defeat Eldest on the first attempt very easily. So with that, we move on to the big box legendary Shadowlugia, and right away I go for Flamethrower into it, dealing just under half, though the burn will put it just below half, so hopefully another Flamethrower is enough to take it down. I decide to Protect here just to heal up a bit, and Flamethrower absolutely takes it down now. So with that, we move on to the battle against Greevil. He leads with this Moltres and Rhydon, and right away I go for Wing Attack into Moltres, not quite dealing half. Shadow Fires aren't doing much. I go for Protect, and then I go for a Flamethrower into Rhydon to see how much damage I'm dealing with that, and it's not quite a one-shot, though maybe with the rare candies it might be. So with that, I decide to go ahead and use up all the rare candies, and at level 73, Moltres gets the move Heat Wave, which I decide to teach over Facade. So going into the battle for the second attempt, and I go for Flamethrower into Rhydon right away, which takes it down in a single hit, and then out comes Exeggutor. Of course, Moltres is still doing consistent damage with Shadow Fire, but I still don't really have a great way to take it down, and I can heal off nearly all of the damage it does. I go for Heat Wave now, that way I can start dealing damage to the Moltres for later in the fight, and it takes down Exeggutor in a single hit. Then out comes Tauros. I can go for Flamethrower to take it down right away, and then out comes the Articuno, which I should be able to take down in a single Flamethrower, I would think anyway. Of course, I am going to go for Protect just so I can heal up a bit, and then I go for Flamethrower into the Articuno, which takes it down in a single hit, and then that sends out Zapdos. Okay, well this is looking extremely good. I go for Protect once again, and then I go for a Flamethrower into the Zapdos, which doesn't quite take it down, but it is very close. Shadow Bolt and Fire take me down to 11, and okay, maybe it's actually a bit worse than I thought. Combined, they're doing over 100 damage, and without the second Protect, there was no way for me to actually get past them. And so with that, we now move on to attempt number 6, where right away I get rid of the Rhydon just like before, and then out comes the Exeggutor. And this is where the strategy changes just a slight bit, because I'm actually going to go for Wing Attack to start dealing damage to the Moltres. That way I know further on down the line I'll be able to take it down with a Heat Wave. The Executor does actually just waste this turn going for Shadow Hold though, so it's actually not as threatening as I thought it was right off the bat. I go for Heat Wave, taking down the Executor and nearly taking down the Moltres. Preferably I would have just taken it down here, but regardless, out comes Tauros, and I go for Flamethrower to take it down in a single turn. And unfortunately, if Tauros were another one-shot with Heat Wave, I would have also liked to take it down in Moltres at the same time, but I can't have it setting up Shadow Sky, so it's not even worth risking. Anyway, with that, I then take down the Articuno, and then he sends out the Zapdos, and once again, I'm back in this position where I was before. However, things are a bit different now because Moltres will go down in a single hit, and without the combined efforts of both, it's actually not nearly as threatening. So with that, I take down the Moltres. I get taken down fairly low, but then I'm able to hit back and take down Zapdos with another Flamethrower. So with that, Moltres has beaten the game, and now that concludes all 3 of the runs. So how well did each legendary bird do? Starting with our first contender, Articuno, it beat the game at a time of 7 hours, 39 minutes, and 38 seconds at level 66, with 7 feints throughout the game, 6 of those to bosses, and 1 of those to random trainers. Moving on to Zapdos, it beat the game at a time of 8 hours, 3 minutes, and 40 seconds at level 75, with 19 feints throughout the game, 15 of those to bosses, and 4 of those to random trainers. And finally, we have Moltres, who beat the game at a time of 8 hours, 39 minutes, and 14 seconds at level 74, with 24 feints throughout the game, 21 of those to bosses, and 3 of those to random trainers. So I guess I'll go over why I think that ended up the way it did, starting with, of course, our winner, Articuno, and that's because it is just extremely consistent throughout the game. Despite its, frankly, abysmal typing in this game, Ice is just way too strong. Now, I think it did get a pretty good hidden power type in Grass because it allowed it to hit the water types that it couldn't hit for super effective damage before. So it was nice against Eldis's Lapras, Snaddle, Starmie, and Gorgon's 2 water types, though I don't think it was especially necessary. I think had the hidden power type been different, Double Edge could have filled the role fairly well, though definitely not as powerful. And I will say that it is a bit of a bummer that both Zapdos and Moltres got just terrible hidden power types for them. I mean, I guess at that second I got them, they were stronger than their already pre-existing moves, but they really needed a bit more type coverage that unfortunately they just did not receive. With that being said though, let's go ahead and go over to Zapdos, which really only lost time in 3 areas. First was, of course, the battle against Snaps, where Zapdos can't hit Rhyhorn whatsoever, and so it had to resort to using Mimic, which of course does take a bit longer. Then moving on to Snaddle, which was just absolutely horrendous, and I really disliked the move Thunder. And then Greevil, which honestly wasn't too bad because I could just reset right away. But it was still kind of annoying that 5 out of 8 attempts I just could not attack whatsoever. With that being said, we now move on to the Fallen King Moltres, and unfortunately, despite being the best Pokemon for the start of the game, because it didn't get a decent hidden power type, and because it can't really do any damage to Snaddle's team, it has to resort to Facade, which entails climbing to Mount Battle of Area 4, which wastes quite a bit of time. But even then, because of the amount of time it had built up from the beginning of the run, it actually was about on par with the other 2. But unfortunately, even after getting Facade, it still wasn't an easy fight. And then on top of that all, Quagsire just needed to miss one time, which it just was not doing. And then even after that massive hurdle, it just was not getting much easier for it in the late game. I mean, sure, it was one-shotting the Pokemon that were neutral to fire or weak to it, but there were so many Pokemon that just survived and were able to attack and deal a ton of damage to it. So unfortunately, the King fell to last. However, that does not mean that Moltres was all that bad, because it still finds itself near the top of the A+ tier, Zapdos finds itself near the front of the S tier, and Articuno is at the bottom of the SS tier. So it's very clear that all these Pokemon are really good, it's just that there's definitely some issues that need to be addressed. Unfortunately, Moltres does carry a lot of the baggage that Articuno does, with its 4x weakness to rock and quite a few weaknesses. However, the flying type does get rid of its ground weakness, which is kind of nice, and the same goes for Zapdos, but electric flying is just an incredible type combination. Now, I do think that there is one thing that heavily skews this race in Articuno's favor, and that is the placement of the Ice Beam TM, because you get it right before Staddle, and right before it you get the Swinub with the Never Melt Ice, so it's doing a ridiculous amount of damage right before the hardest fight in this game for these 3 legendary birds. And while Moltres does also have it bad getting the Flamethrower TM after the SS Libra, had I needed extra levels, at level 49 it actually learns Flamethrower, which is not the case for Zapdos, because it actually requires the Thunderbolt TM at the Pyramid Cypher base, so it has to wait 3/4 of the way through the game before it even gets access to its best move. So I think maybe going into this I was a bit naive thinking that all 3 were going to do about the same as each other, but now in hindsight I see that Articuno actually had a lot of things stacked in its favor for winning this race. But anyway, if you did enjoy this versus video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye.